Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Lucas Turner. I'm a reporter here at the Rio Blanco Herald-Times, doing our 2022 candidate interviews for local candidates. Today, I am interviewing candidate for Rio Blanco County Sheriff, Rich Garner, currently the patrol lieutenant for the Rangeley Police Department. He's served in law enforcement for 30 decades. Is that 300 years? He served in law enforcement for 3 decades, also formerly served in the United States military in the Army for 7 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk about your candidacy and your campaign for Rio Blanco County Sheriff. So I guess just to get started, have you been thinking about doing this for a long time? Was it something that came up recently that you thought about running for the sheriff? What motivated you to do this?
Well, I off and on over the years, I've been asked different times to run for different offices. Town council being one of those. When I retired in 2014, I was asked to run for council and serve on the council, and there were times. And of course, since retirement, I was asked several times about running for sheriff. But it was never one of those things that I felt that I needed to do. Not until within the last year. Some of the things I have observed since coming back out of retirement and going back into law enforcement. And then, of course, for me, the one that really kind of pushed me over the line and made me decide to run was the closure of the jail and the impact of that on both of our communities, Meeker and Rangeley, and the county as a whole.
Okay, so I guess maybe we could jump into that subject. There's a lot of different things that we could talk about. Obviously, the closure of the jail was an issue, was controversial for a lot of people. From my understanding, you've talked about reopening the jail. Is that correct?
Yep, I would like to explore the possibility of reopening the jail. That is correct.
So the question then is, how do you plan on bringing in $11 million in revenue to reopen the jail, assuming that's the amount that it would take to reopen, whatever the amount would be? What kind of plans do you have for doing that?
Well, I think it's going to come down to first going to come down to a matter of figuring out exactly what is needed to reopen the jail. What are we looking at staff-wise? What are we looking at equipment-wise? The jail is there. It is a fully modern, fully functioning jail that, in all likelihood, they probably just merely put into mothballs. So we already have the facility, which is the biggest cost. We have people locally that used to work at the jail that would probably just need a short refresher train up and could put them back on. The two biggest things I think with reopening the jail would be, one, finding a jail administrator, somebody that is well versed in current jail operations and also fully up to speed on what current state law is for requirements of opening a detention facility. And then, of course, finding the funding for it. Finding the funding for it is going to be a matter of working in conjunction between the sheriff's office and the county commissioners to figure out what is needed to open the jail fund-wise and where we would be able to find the funds. Part of those revenues, of course, would be coming in from outside agencies housing prisoners there, which is very common throughout the state. Other jurisdictions do that as well, and then, of course, the rest of it would be coming from the taxpayer themselves.
Okay. Do you know how much money is being saved from not having the jail open? And what are the costs incurred by the two local police departments? As in, what is the, I guess, financial or expense impact on Rangeley Police Department?
I don't know exactly how much cost savings. I think that they were looking at $1 million to $1.5 million, maybe a little bit more than that, cost savings a year that
for the county
that the county was taking to keep the detention facility open. But when they cut that budget, it didn't go back into the county coffers. It didn't save the taxpayer any money. They just rediverted that money somewhere else. So,
right.
County taxes didn't decrease. People's tax rates didn't decrease. So it's more of a matter of finding in the budget, in the county budget, in the county with the commissioners to find out where we could come up with the money to reopen that jail. The money's there. It may be allocated to different places, but it's something worth exploring. Now, you asked about the impact to the towns. So,
and particularly the Rangeley Police Department or Meeker Police Department. I
think I can. Okay. The Rangeley Police Department, the impact to Rangeley PD is not a whole lot different than what's happening with Meeker. But so what used to be about a 2-hour turnaround time from the time that we left out of Rangeley to transport a prisoner to Meeker and book them into the jail has now increased to between 3 and 4 hours because we have a significant more different distance to travel.
Right.
The other issue that we have now with the jail is we have to stay at that jail until the jail staff or detention staff releases us, which is not uncommon. The jail staff here in Meeker was pretty fast. I mean, you could probably come in, give them your paperwork, advise them of what you're charging them with, make sure there's no questions or anything else. They would pull your transport belt and cuffs off them, and you were free to go. Craig sometimes is a little bit longer. I've been there as long as 45 minutes, almost an hour, while they're processing a prisoner before they release me. It's not always like that, but it's not unusual for that to be like that either.
Yeah.
The other problem that we have right now, which happens quite often, is if we want to make an arrest that's not a mandatory arrest, like a domestic violence crimes against person arrest, right, which is a mandatory arrest in the state of Colorado. Let's just say a person has a warrant for $1,000 warrant for failure to appear on some sort of charge. Now we have to call the jail in Moffat County and find out if they'll take the prisoner. And many times they'll be like, they can't, they're full, or they don't have the staffing. So that person, we just have to let them go. We've done the same thing. There's the same thing has happened with a DUI where they didn't have the room or they were full or didn't have the staffing to be able to deal with it. So it was basically write them a ticket and release them, which would normally be a physical arrest and transport to jail where they'd have to bond out. So those are some of the issues as far as prisoners go. The other thing is the amount of time and resources that are devoted to making that transport. So the whole time that that officer in Rangeley and in Meeker is gone on a transport, we have to put another member of our staff on call out. Somebody has to be able to take calls within a town. So the amount of standby time has gone up significantly because of that. Wear and tear on vehicles, fuel cost, all of those things culminated into a serious increase. Now, my issue with that is because we don't have a detention facility here in the county, but your county taxes haven't gone down. We're already paying for that. But now the taxpayers in the towns of Rangeley and Meeker are having to foot an additional bill for all these accumulated cost of transporting to Craig. So I don't agree with the decision to close the jail. I think that it was short-sighted. I understand about budgetary cuts and things like that, but they were not required to make a budgetary cut. The sheriff just decided that he did not want to run the jail anymore and thought that he would close down the jail and get rid of that responsibility.
Okay. Let's see. I guess I had a question about what are the costs incurred by the two local police departments. Sounds like we could get into, I could go look into the nitty gritty of the budget details.
It'd be very difficult to actually put a hard number on that because it's a constantly moving kind of target. Fuel prices are always changing. That impacts it.
And there's not like a normal number of arrests
Nope,
every month.
there's
or
not.
anything.
That always changes. I mean, we've had weeks where we've had multiple arrests, and we've had weeks where we had 0 arrests. And then sometimes that'll depend on the time of the day that we're making an arrest. So if we're making the arrest on an afternoon when evening shift's ready to come in, we don't have to worry about as much putting somebody on standby versus if it's the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then having to call a guy at home and putting him on standby to handle calls in town while that car makes that, 3 to 4 hour round trip to Moffat County and back.
So I guess
for Rangeley, Meeker would probably be 2.5 hours maybe round trip, give or take.
I guess the thing that we're kind of thinking about is, in relation to this question, is there's cost savings on the county side, but there's also cost incurred by the police, the local police departments for each town,
and the taxpayer of the towns. Yeah, they're the ones.
So how that actually measures out may be like a bean counter thing, and maybe a little bit harder to figure out, but it's something that we're aware of. So
yeah, I think the big thing is, Lucas, with that is nothing's free.
Yeah,
right. Nothing. You're going to pay for it somewhere. So yeah, the county may be saving some money by closing down the jail facility, but the taxpayers in both the towns are picking up an increased burden that they normally would not have because of it, right? I could see if it was offset where their county tax rate went down to compensate for that, but it hasn't and won't. They're still paying the same amount of taxes to the county.
Yeah.
Now they're having to pay more cost in the towns for the same services. So it's sooner or later. I mean, nothing is free.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about something that would be more of an operational thing if you were elected as Rio Blanco County Sheriff. Wildland fire is, an ever-increasing problem that the sheriff's office plays a role in handling. What's your experience with firefighting, particularly from the standpoint of chain of command and financing?
Well, as you well know from my background, I spent a lot of years in the sheriff's office, in a mid-level supervisor as a sergeant, and so I was incident commander on many fires. A lot of times the sheriff's office and local fire departments are the first ones on scene, but depending on the location and the scope of the fire, BLM or Forest Service usually comes in and takes over command from that. And then, just like always happens, we work in conjunction with them, right? They are the experts in fighting the fire. So firefighting is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with for a long time, especially considering we're involved in a very long-term drought and the dry conditions. Wildland firefighting is not something we're going to be getting rid of anytime soon, for sure. So it's a fact of life.
Okay. If you are elected as sheriff, do you intend to move to Meeker, where the sheriff's office is located, or would you continue to live in Rangeley?
I would continue to live in Rangeley. It's still within Rio Blanco County.
Right.
I am a firm believer that Rio Blanco County is one county. We should be, and we're one community. And although there sometimes is a little bit of rivalry between Meeker and Rangeley, and we have people that probably have some very outdated views on the us versus them mentality. I truly believe that Rio Blanco County as a community is a solid community and should be viewed as one community. I don't see that I absolutely need to move to Meeker. There's no logistical reason to move to Meeker, especially now with modern technology and everything else. I could be on a Zoom meeting from anywhere on the planet to a commissioner meeting or things like that. One thing I would like to see, though, is if I'm going to continue to live in Rangeley, whoever I pick as my number 2, second in command, would live in Meeker or in the Meeker area here. I think it's good having somebody with the authority, that command presence on both ends of the county, I think you just stay better in tune with what's going on. It is a big county. There's a lot going on there. And I think that would probably help the coverage and the response better that way.
Okay. So you talked about that, rivalry, however real or perceived it is. That kind of gets towards something more specific to law enforcement locally.
Okay.
That I think is worthwhile to address. So questions about jurisdiction in the past have been, problematic between the sheriff's office and Rangeley Police Department in particular, at least from our perspective, and you can, comment on that if you want, but describe what you know about that and if you have any ideas on rectifying whatever issues may exist in terms of that question of jurisdiction between the two.
Well, jurisdiction is just the boundaries that you operate within, right? And those are usually set by the city limits and state statute and things like that. There, in the past, former sheriffs have been very good about trying to be all-inclusive with everybody that's in a law enforcement realm within the county. Under Cy Woodruff, when he was the sheriff, every police officer within the county, whether it's Meeker or Rangeley, all were commissioned deputies. So they had full authority to be able to go outside the city limits when needed to conduct like a lot of times what would happen is they're working on an investigation of something that happened within the city limits. They need to go outside the city limits to conduct, an interview or something like that concerning that incident. Or when we had some sort of critical incident happen, car crashes, wildland fires, drownings. There's a whole endless list of things that happened that would be outside the city limits of Rangeley or Meeker, but many times because the county's so large and there's only one or two deputies on many times, they may be completely out of position to respond quickly to an incident, whereas the towns could be there in just a few minutes and help facilitate care and start coordinating other response to that incident. We don't have that now, but I would like to see a time where we get back to that. You have a large county with few law enforcement and working together without friction is much more efficient and much safer for everybody involved. That is my personal belief on that. I think that the officers at the operation level, at the street level, work well together. I think they really understand that there's a lot of territory to cover, and usually those officers are working by themselves. So anybody that can respond and help them out in times of need are valued. I think the friction and everything is more at the upper administration level. That has been my observation.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that that's part of your goal, or one of your main goals is to facilitate more of that cooperation?
Absolutely. So I am an old school, traditional law enforcement guy. I fully understand that there are jurisdictional boundaries for things and that everybody has their place in law enforcement, right? Deputies have their jobs to do. Police officers have their jobs to do. We have our areas that we need to cover. But it takes all of us together to provide services for our community, right? And we are much more effective when we work together in a concerted effort. And the only way you can achieve that is people working together without friction. Friction creates, it's inefficient. And when we work together in a very cohesive type way, it's better for the community. Here's the other flip side of that. So one of the things that happens when you're trying to work when you're working in a law enforcement agency and you work well with the other law enforcement agencies around you, you consolidate training. You train together so that when you have these critical incidents, the officers that are responding to those incidents have already worked well with each other. They've already trained with each other. They understand everybody's strengths, weaknesses, and they can concentrate on the task at hand and not have to worry about, well, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, and what can you provide and what can you do. And that's better for everybody. And it makes it a lot safer for the officers that are working. And the other one last thing, and this can't be sold too short either. We work in an extremely difficult job. The people who do law enforcement understand that it's a difficult job in a hard environment, and in this day and age, there's a lot of challenges that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago, especially with public opinion and things like that. The health and welfare of the officer is better when we all work together. We have mutual support. We can provide that camaraderie and that companionship with each other, that support, with each other. Just like any company would have between employees, how they support each other and help each other out. The same things with law enforcement. Yeah, we have different uniforms, but our goal is exactly the same. And that's all about providing a service to our community, and that is public safety.
All right. I think that gets us towards my next question, which is really about your philosophy for rural law enforcement. It sounds like broadly cooperation, camaraderie, everybody being in their place and understanding how jurisdiction applies, but also everybody working together as part of that. But I wonder, if you could maybe drill down more into like rural law enforcement, what that means, and how you kind of, we say, what is your philosophy? But I feel like you could probably interpret that a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a big thing to kind of wrap your hands around. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, it starts with protection of life and property, right? And in that realm of protection of life and property, the first person that is responsible for that is the individual, right? So helping the individual, first off, protecting their rights and providing them the tools that they need to protect their life and protect their property is important, because truly, the most successful rural law enforcement agencies that I've had in my experience to be around in 30 years, they all come from the same place. We approach this as a community issue. Everybody in the community contributes to this, whether, hey, it's just somebody picking up the phone and saying there's like something going on down the street, or I see this suspicious vehicle out there, or there's a truck with a stock trailer out in the middle of the night. That's where it starts, right? Everybody taking a role in this, because, like I said before, there's not a lot of law enforcement officers within this county, and we've got a lot of county to cover, and it takes everybody partaking in that and understanding the importance of it that make it successful, right? So you have the individual and you have the community involvement. Well, then law enforcement has to come in and they have to be in tune with that community, right? They have to be involved with that community. And the community as a whole needs to have faith and trust in them that they're doing the right thing for the right reason. And when all of those things are in place, you have good law enforcement and a safe community. And that's kind of in a nutshell my outlook on law enforcement and public safety within Rio Blanco County.
Okay. That'll make sense to me. Let's shift to talking about, we've discussed this a little bit already in talking about the jail, but what experience do you have with large-scale budgets and finance, considering the sheriff's office as the second largest budgetary expense for the county. And how do you plan to, I guess, apply that experience in the current climate, which is basically there's always going to be pressure to cut budget or find ways to be more efficient, et cetera?
Well, like any other sheriff that's come in here, I doubt that there's been a sheriff that's come into Rio Blanco County, at least within the memory of most people, that have experience with a budget the scale the sheriff's office has. Like most people that have come in, I've had experience with budgets at a town level, and I definitely probably had my portion of a budget when I worked for the sheriff's office, because I overseen, some of the training budget, expenditures for vehicles and things like that. I would be involved in part of that process, but the entire budget, the only thing that I've ever done that would probably come close to that was helping oversee the budget for a large 600-man department when I was in Iraq. Right, I oversaw all of that budget. I had control over portions of it, but I didn't make that budget. I didn't set that budget, but I controlled things like personnel, vehicles, weapons, ammunition, fuel costs, things like that. Those are things that I had direct control over. I could change, I could stop, depending on the circumstances. But I didn't make that budget, and I didn't set that budget. The budget at the jail is going to be considerably bigger than the Rangeley Police Department budget, considerably bigger than Meeker Police Department. But the way that you get around that is you put good, smart, quality people that have experience with you. And then, again, the budget is a group effort. You approach it as, what do you absolutely need, first off, and then what would you like, right? What's some other things that you would like to have, right? So obviously, vehicles, fuel, and personnel cost are ones that you have a hard time getting around those. And those numbers kind of move a little bit depending on the year, depending on what fuel costs are, vehicle costs, things like that, or the vehicles how many vehicles do you need to purchase because you have other vehicles worn out. You can put together that list. But really with budget, you put in kind of your idea of what a budget is, but then you still have to go to the commissioners, and then everybody works together to come up with the final budget. But I guarantee you, using last year's budget would be a good start on next year's. They do that already, and as long as I have smart people around me, I'll make sure that they know things that I don't, and vice versa.
So, in terms of that team around you, or the people that you work with, it can obviously be a challenge when somebody who was well-versed in something, whatever that may be, whether they're a law enforcement officer like yourself, or if they work in another county department, it can be a real challenge when somebody with expertise leaves and you have to deal with that turnover. So what kind of strategies would you have for managing people to combat that turnover, to keep people around, I guess?
Yep.
And also to prevent the types of things that lead to it, like interpersonal conflicts between people and stuff like that.
I'll tell you what, Lucas, if I could come up with like a really good ironclad answer to this, I would be making millions and millions of dollars.
Go on a speaking tour. Yeah.
I would. I'm telling you, there is not a company on the planet or a government organization that would not want me to come and fix their problem for them. It is a constant thing that you deal with. And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. Some people leave because of money. Some people leave because of opportunity. Some people leave because they're not happy with where they work. We've had people leave because they couldn't stand winters. We've had people leave because they hated the summer. I mean, there is a myriad of reasons. But usually, it comes down to a couple of things. The morale of the people that you supervise, and their job satisfaction. Okay. And it's hard always to be all things to all people. You understand that? But I think one of the big things that's important when you're working in any organization, and I ran into this especially when I was a safety consultant for Chevron. You work in a very fast-paced environment, and it's ever constantly changing. People don't always embrace change. They struggle with that. One of the best things that in my experience you could do is to be an all-inclusive team type environment, right? Everybody is part of this. And if you're going to succeed, everybody is part of that as well. And people need to know that they're valuable and what they contribute is valuable, whether they're the person sweeping the hallway or they're the person making the decisions behind the desk. Everybody has a place and they're all important. The biggest part about keeping people happy is providing them everything they need to do their job and letting them know how important they are and how valuable they are. You brought up a good point. People with expertise leave. It always leaves a hole. I mean, and it's tough. It's tough to deal with. Somebody else is going to be getting that expertise. I don't know any way to really combat that effectively except to provide them incentives to want to stay here. We already have part of it already in place. We live in a fantastic area here. It is a great place to live. It's a great place to raise your family. That's why I ended up here in the first place. And that in itself provides a lot of incentive for people to leave. And as long as you have that in place and you're giving them the tools they need to do their job effectively, and you're providing them the means for job satisfaction, or at least attempting to, a lot of times it's not as big of an issue. You're never going to stop. I have never worked anywhere that we did not have turnover. Never.
Yeah.
I've worked for places that had less. I've worked for places that had more. I think when I worked at Grand County Sheriff's Office in the 10 years that I worked there, we had a staff at that time of about 40, anywhere between 40 and 45 people, counting the jail, dispatch, admin, records, investigate, all of that. About somewhere between 40 and 45 people. In the 10 years that I worked there prior to going to Iraq, we went through 147 employees in 10 years. That is a huge number to go through. And there was a lot of reasons behind that. Some people left for money, like I said. But we had a lot of people that it was just extremely difficult to live in a tourist area, in a high-cost mountain area, a resort community, and the winters were extremely long. And we literally had people that were like, after the first winter, like, we cannot do this. We just can't. It's just too much winter for us. We can't do it. So you're never going to eliminate all the problem. But as long as you try to do your very best to give them what they need and to let them know how valuable they are and let them know that they are making a huge difference, you can at least try to slow it down.
Okay, one final sort of subject, and we can go back on anything if you have if you have any other thoughts. What plans do you have for dispatch, if any? It is, from my understanding, somewhat unusual for a county to have two dispatch centers. What do you think needs to happen in general, and then more specifically to improve communication between the sheriff's office and both police departments?
Well, let's talk about the dispatch. I will admit that this is only the second place where I've ever worked that we had a police department that had a dispatch, and then we had a dispatch center at the sheriff's office, and it was, but almost everywhere else usually have some sort of consolidated dispatch somewhere. When I worked down at Rio Grande County, the Rio Grande Sheriff's Office had their own dispatch. And then most of the police departments went through Colorado State Patrol out of Alamosa. But I think there was a short time there where Monte Vista had their own dispatch as well. So it's not unusual. But in this day and age with cost and things like that, I think you're starting to see more and more consolidated type dispatching centers. It is unusual that Rio Blanco County has a dispatch center and Rangeley both have a dispatch center, but that is a decision that Rangeley as a town made, that they felt the dispatch center was important enough to them that they would fund it. Will there come a time where they may not? There could be. Same with the county.
Yeah.
The county may get to a point where they decide that the cost associated with running a dispatch center is too much for what they perceive they're getting out of it. So I have no plans at all, contrary to the rumors that have been flying around, that I am going to close the Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center. I have no plans of that. The only plan I have definitively is I really want to explore reopening the jail. Will I get it done? I don't know. Is there an appetite to take on that kind of cost? Again, I don't know, but it needs to be looked at. The dispatch center, again, it is an expenditure of funds, and it's going to come down to whether or not the taxpayer in this county thinks that it's worth expending the money to do that. Dispatching has gotten considerably more expensive over the years because of the type of radio systems and dispatching systems and stuff that are involved in it. It is a huge cost undertaking. And whereas in the old days you might have a radio system that might last you 10, 15, 20 years, it probably won't last as long now because it'll get superseded by technology. Mm-hmm. So I will iterate again. I have no plans to close the Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to, do you have any final thoughts? We went through all of our questions here. So if you have any final thoughts about, why you're running or what you want people to know, feel free to drop those in here. Otherwise, that's pretty much it.
Well, I maybe a few things. One, I'm not a politician. I am a professional law enforcement guy. And I really truly believe that the position of sheriff, especially in this size of a county, does not need a politician. We do politics out of necessity because it's an elected office, not because it's really fun, which it's not. There are some challenges with it, and I enjoy having a challenge the same as everybody else, but it is really not the funnest thing to do. Secondly, I would just ask everybody, become involved and vote. Whether vote for me, vote for the current sheriff, don't vote for either one, but get involved. Get involved with the issues, find out what's going on in the community, find out what's happening and become involved in it. We, as a society, I think sometimes lose faith that maybe our voice is not heard and our vote's not counted. But I can tell you at the local and the county level especially, every vote is important. Everybody's viewpoint is important. And I just would urge people to go out and exercise their right and vote. It's important to all of us as a community.
Cool. I can agree with that. So once again, speaking today with Rich Garner, running for Rio Blanco County Sheriff. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lucas. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody that listens in on this and the time they took to listen to my viewpoints.